order to understand the long-term and short-term stress response, we need to understand the structure and function of the adrenal glands. We have the adrenal glands are found on top of the kidneys. There are two portions to the adrenal glands. The adrenal medulla is the inner portion, and the adrenal cortex is the outer portion. The adrenal cortex has three separate sections to it. Each section is going to secrete different hormones. All of the hormones secreted by the adrenal cortex are called corticosteroids. Cortex, cortico, that's where we get the name from. And these are all going to be steroid hormones. That's why they're called corticosteroids. We have over 24 different hormones being produced by the adrenal cortex. We are only going to talk about three specific ones. The three different layers of the adrenal cortex, our outermost layer is our zona glomerulosa. That is going to secrete our mineral corticoids, which are going to be responsible for maintaining our mineral and electrolyte balance. Middle layer is our glucocorticoids. That is going to obviously have something to do with glucose levels in the blood. And then our gonadocorticoids are going to secrete steroids that are going to affect our gonads, or our testes and our ovaries. Looking at our zona glomerulosa, or our outermost layer, this is going to secrete those mineral corticoids. These are going to be responsible for our electrolyte concentrations. Minerals are ions. They're going to be our electrolytes. The most important of these are our sodium and potassium found in our extracellular fluids, such as blood and interstitial fluid. We'll talk about the importance of these electrolytes and water balance when we get to the kidney chapter later on in the semester. Most important mineral corticoid is called our aldosterone. Aldosterone is going to work on the kidneys, and it's going to basically tell the kidneys to hold on to or reabsorb sodium and get rid of potassium. So it's going to hold on to sodium and get rid of potassium. Now, when our kidneys hold on to or reabsorb sodium, they are also going to hold on to or reabsorb water as well. Water likes to follow sodium wherever it goes. So if we hold on to sodium, we're going to hold on to water. And a final result of that is that it's going to increase our blood volume and blood pressure. And we'll talk about the relationship between those two in the blood vessels chapter. So aldosterone will be secreted for three reasons. The first one is called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. So when our blood pressure decreases, that's going to set off a chain of events that we'll talk about in the urinary system chapter. And eventually that chain of events will cause the release of aldosterone, because again, aldosterone causes us to hold on to sodium as well as water, and that's going to help to increase our blood pressure. So the first reason it's released is this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. Second reason is if our potassium levels get too high, since one of the things that aldosterone does is tells the kidneys to get rid of potassium. If we have too much potassium, then this is going to tell our adrenal cortex to release the aldosterone so that we can get rid of that excess potassium. And the last one is that adrenocorticotropic hormone from the hypothalamus. So that will cause release of all of the corticosteroids. This hormone down here, atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP, this is going to be released in response to high blood pressure, and it's going to inhibit the release of aldosterone. So this is going to have that opposite effect, tell our body to get rid of excess sodium, get rid of excess water, and help to bring our blood pressure back down. Next layer of our cortex is the zona fasciculata. This is going to release our glucocorticoids. The only important one that we release as humans is cortisol. Again, since it says gluco in the name, we know it has something to do with glucose regulation. So cortisol is going to help to cause an increase in blood levels of glucose as well as fatty acids and amino acids. And it's going to a primary effect is going to be gluconeogenesis, or literally making new glucoses. So it's going to take substances that are in our body, and our body's then going to put those together to make new glucoses so that we have energy in order to do stuff. This also, the cortisol is going to enhance vasoconstriction, and that is going to help to increase our blood pressure. Release of cortisol is governed by the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus will release that corticotropin releasing hormone, will tell the anterior pituitary gland to release the adrenocorticotropic hormone, and then the adrenal cortex will release this cortisol. So stimulus for release here, you could say, is either governed by the hypothalamus or more specifically that ACTH hormone. Once we have enough level, high enough level of cortisol in the bloodstream, that will cause a negative feedback loop on the hypothalamus and will stop releasing that CRH. Cortical secretion, this is a cyclical release, so we have rhythms of this. So we're going to have, during the night, we don't release a lot of this cortisol. Just before you wake up, you're going to have a big surge, and right after you wake up, you'll have a nice big surge that's going to kind of flood your body with some glucose. Get you all revved up, give you fuel for the day, and then as you go through the day, the levels are going to decline, and then you'll have your lowest levels just before you go to bed because you don't need a lot of energy when you're sleeping, and then you'll go through the same pattern the next morning just before, and as you wake up, you'll have a nice flood of this, and then it'll decrease throughout the day. Central nervous system can override this normal cyclical pattern, and we'll talk about the stress response and how that can influence this cyclical pattern. This slide you can read over on your own about the two diseases for hyper and hyposecretion of our glucocorticoids. Those we're not going to really go over that much. As well as this section as well, the gonadocorticoids. These are very weak hormones. The hormones that your testes and ovaries are much stronger and exert much more effect on your body. So these are not very well studied. We don't really know a lot about them. That's why you see may contribute to. So they really think that these gonadocorticoids have a lot to do with before and after, before puberty and women after menopause when they stop making estrogen. That's when they think these hormones are going to exert their greatest effect. So for this, you just have to remember the gonadocorticoids are released by that innermost zona reticularis. Stimulus of release, again, they think it's ACTH, but they're not exactly sure. And you don't even really have to worry too much about exactly what they do because, again, your estrogen and testosterone are much stronger sex hormones. Innermost portion of the adrenal gland is going to be your adrenal medulla. This has a direct connection to the nervous system. So we have that nervous stimuli that is going to cause a release of these hormones. This is going to secrete our sympathetic nervous system hormones of epinephrine and norepinephrine, or our adrenaline. Effects of these hormones, just think of your sympathetic nervous system response. So increasing heart rate, increasing blood pressure, increasing blood glucose levels. Blood's going to go to the skeletal muscles and not so much to the digestive system anymore. So stimulus for release here is going to be direct stimulation from the nervous system. Target cells in this case are going to be most of the cells in the body. So heart cells are going to beat faster. Most of our cells are going to work to help to increase our glucose levels. So all of these things are going to be happening. It's going to be a systemic effect all over the body. These hormones have a very short half-life, so that after you go through a sympathetic response, your heart isn't beating for hours afterwards. It'll slow down pretty quickly. About 20 minutes or so, these hormones will be out of your bloodstream. So with that, and talking about those different hormones that are released by the adrenal gland, now we can talk about these stress responses. So our short-term stress response, this is what happens when your nervous system signals the sympathetic nervous system response, or fight or flight response. So something happens, an emergency happens, and we have that direct response, that direct connection telling our adrenal medulla to release our epinephrine and norepinephrine. And again, all of those things that we've talked about are going to happen. Increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased breathing rate, metabolic rate goes up, glucose rates go up. All of those things are going to happen. Long-term stress response, when that sympathetic nervous system event hits, then we are also going to release ACTH, and that is going to go into the bloodstream and cause the release of our mineral corticoids and our glucocorticoids. So that will also help to bring our blood pressure up by retaining that water and ions by the kidneys. And it'll also help to bring that glucose level up as well. These hormones are going to stay in the blood a little bit longer. So this response is going to last a little bit longer. Now, it's normal for us throughout a typical day to go through little bumps of having sympathetic responses. So you get up and you exercise a little bit. So there you have your sympathetic nervous system kicks in for a little bit. And then your parasympathetic will come back once you're done exercising. And then as you go through your day, say you have a test in one of your classes. So you get a little nervous for that. That's going to cause a fight or flight response. So you're going to have a jolt of these hormones come in. It's going to bring your heart rate up a little bit. But that's actually good for a test because it increases your blood flow to your brain. It increases availability of glucose so your brain cells can think a little bit better. Then the test is over and you'll come back down and your parasympathetic nervous system brings you back to homeostasis. And then you go home and something happens at home and you have a little stress response. So normally throughout our day, we're kind of conditioned to have short-term stress responses, but then come back down to homeostasis. Now, what happens when you have a long-term stress response, when you are constantly under stress and your parasympathetic nervous system doesn't kick back in when it should to help to bring everything back down to homeostasis? That's when we have this long-term stress response. And if you're under constant stress of tons of tests and family life might not be great and you're fighting with your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever those stresses are, emotional stresses, you are going to your hypothalamus, because it's so involved with the limbic system, it will be constantly stimulated and it will constantly release this ACTH, the adrenocorticotropic hormone, and that will cause a constant release of your mineral corticoids and your glucocorticoids. So this is how it's going to lead to, when you are under long-term stress, your blood pressure can go up and stay pretty high because you're constantly releasing that aldosterone, retaining all of this sodium and water. It's going to increase your blood pressure. Also, you're constantly going to be releasing cortisol, the glucocorticoid, and that is going to increase your blood glucose levels. So this is going to cause you to gain weight, possibly become pre-diabetic or cause type 2 diabetes. And also your immune system will be suppressed by this cortisol if it's in your system for too long. And that's why if you're in a time of a lot of stress, you tend to get sick. So once you go to college, or you may even see it now towards the end of a term when you have a period of time where you have a lot of tests, you will see that a lot of people will start to get sick during finals week or during these periods of stress. And that's because you're constantly releasing these hormones. So one of the ways to counter this is a lot of doctors now, if they have clients who have high blood glucose levels and high blood pressure, along with possible medications and things like that, they are also starting to recommend or prescribe things like meditation, relaxation exercises, massage, anything to help try and relieve the stress. Exercise is also a very good stress reliever. So all of these things will help with that stress response, help to kind of calm the hypothalamus down, get rid of some of that stress, so you stop releasing the ACTH, so you don't release these two hormones in excess, and will help to decrease all of those symptoms, the high blood pressure, the high glucose levels, and the suppressed immune response. So hopefully that helps. When you are trying to answer this homework question, don't just go in and copy down everything on this slide. Kind of try and explain what's going on, like hopefully I was able to do today. Thanks.